friends, thank you for joining me for another monthly reading wrap-up. My hair might look a little bit wild today because I mowed the lawn earlier and took a shower, and normally I sleep on my hair to kind of tame it down a little bit. So right now it's just blow dried and kind of going everywhere. And also hopefully my eyes are not bloodshot anymore because I have seasonal allergies, and often mowing the lawn just really kicks up all that grass and dust and all that stuff. So my eyes were looking pretty red earlier, so hopefully by now that's calmed down. But anyway, let's go ahead and get into this month's wrap up. The first book I finished was Dreams Lie Beneath by Rebecca Ross. I got this through Owlcrate, and this is a YA fantasy that takes place in the realm of Azanor. And during every new moon, the citizens of this world are plagued by nightmares that are brought to life. As in, literally, the nightmares that people have at night manifest in the real world. And there are magicians called wardens who battle against these nightmares to protect regular folk. And you're following a magician named Clementine, who is supposed to become warden of her small town after her father, but things go wrong when their position is threatened by two outsider magicians. A lot of this is actually kind of like a revenge / mystery story. So Clem, she goes by Clem, is trying to investigate one of the strangers in particular named Felon to get revenge on him and his family. And then there's the overarching plot of how to end this living nightmare curse. So this was, for me, really lackluster, unfortunately. I ended up giving this 2 out of 5 stars. It was very forgettable, even though the idea of fighting living nightmares with magic sounds super cool. I love that idea, but the way it was done in this book was just so boring. There are only a few actual nightmare battles, if you can really call them like battles, and they're super brief and not all that exciting to read about. You might imagine it'd be like, ooh yeah, they're gonna fight some like demonic creature or, you know, some wild animal or something like that. But one of the earliest ones is they ride on a boat through the city or the town that has flooded, and there are lily pads everywhere, and you better swim through that water, and it's just really not as exciting as I was hoping it would be. Most of the characters are so flat. Felon might as well be a cardboard cutout of a person for how little of a personality he had. Not even joking. It's sort of an enemies to lovers, but there was just no believable spark between Felon and Clem at all. Why they were attracted to each other, I have no idea. I also tend to prefer more richly defined magic systems, and the magic in here had the start of being interesting, but basically in practice it was all hand-wavy randomness. Most of the characters didn't seem to have super strong motivations for anything they were doing, and were all so flat. They were just so flat. Some things were like almost interesting, or they were occasionally interesting, but for the most part I didn't care about what was happening. I didn't feel the urgency of anything, and it was really forgettable for me, even though I really liked the idea. I only really liked like one character named Mazarine. She's an old lady, at least she appears to be, and the most interesting character by far. I really like the premise though, so if you've read anything in a similar vein that you liked, such as stuff like interacting with dreams or dreams coming to life, please let me know. I read the Strange the Dreamer duology by Laini Taylor. I listened to the audiobooks and I loved it. I really loved them. So I know it can be done well. This just wasn't it, fam. So I finished 2 audiobooks this month actually, and the first one was for a book called Spin by Robert Charles Wilson and narrated by Scott Brick. And this is the first in a sci-fi series, but I think that it could work as a standalone. The main character is a guy named Tyler Dupree, and the book is told in a dual timeline. One timeline follows him starting when he's a young boy, moving forward through his life, and the other timeline is in the present, which is actually in the far-flung future, and eventually the gap between the two is caught up. So basically, the plot is that one night, out of nowhere, while Tyler is hanging out with his friends Diane and Jason when they're young kids, they're outside and the moon and the stars disappear. The sky just goes black, and it's because some kind of shell has enclosed the Earth. They call it the spin membrane. No one knows how it got there, who put it there, why it's there, anything like that, and time within the membrane, so time on Earth, runs extremely slowly compared to outside of it. So 1 second inside the membrane on Earth is equal to about 3 years on the outside. So the universe is rapidly aging, and if you recall from science class, our sun is destined to expand, billions of years from now, and eventually render the Earth uninhabitable, and that future starts approaching very rapidly. So you're following Tyler growing up in this world of uncertainty, and his friend Jason becomes a renowned scientist determined to unlock the secrets of the spin and save humanity, basically. This is very character driven. It's a slow build up with a few big different reveals spaced throughout. There are technical and science-y explanations for things that they're learning and trying to create. This is not action-packed, but there's drama and those rewarding moments where you learn a little bit more about the spin membrane and things related to it, or something really dramatic and unexpected happens that shakes things up. I ended up giving this a 5 out of 5 stars. It isn't a new favorite, I guess, necessarily. I almost gave it a 4 because I'm so used to docking points because a book has too many slow moments. I normally don't like slow-paced books, but honestly, I can't really think of a good reason not to give this the full rating, 5 stars. I enjoyed it. I was intrigued most of the time, and I didn't mind the lack of a fast plot. Even though I don't have a favorite character, it's not really that kind of story. I'm pretty neutral towards everyone. They all feel very real and have their own story and vices and struggles. I'd say go into it with the right expectations, and it's really good. This does not have a fast-paced plot. It doesn't have a lot of aliens, even though they're talked about and obviously are responsible for the spin membrane. This is very humanity focused on humanity's reactions and what happens after. It's a slow burn with lots of science. So if that sounds up your alley, then you'll really enjoy it. I am interested in eventually picking up the sequel. I think it's a trilogy, so there's 2 other books, and I am interested enough to eventually continue the series one day. Then I finally got around to reading The Invisible Life of Addie Larue by V.E. Schwab. I have yet to read a book by V.E. Schwab that I didn't like. I want to read all of her books eventually, and I have her recent release, Gallant, on my shelf. So this is about a girl named Addie Larue who makes a Faustian bargain with an ancient, nameless demon god. You're not entirely sure what it is, but she makes this bargain in a moment of desperation, and in exchange for a life of freedom, she offers her soul to this god. And as a result, she becomes immortal and can no longer be remembered by anyone who sees her or interacts with her. People forget she exists. They forget any interactions they had with her within moments of her leaving their field of vision, basically. She can't really leave any evidence of her existence behind at all. She can't write notes. Photographs taken of her don't turn out properly, so it's truly like she doesn't exist. So she makes this bargain in France in the late 1600s, and the present day in this book is 2014. So she's lived for about 300 years as a sort of living ghost moving through the world. But one day she goes into this bookshop in New York, and this guy remembers her. This was also very character driven, very beautiful and sad and desperate. I am not an overly emotional reader. Books don't really make me cry, but this really did pull up my heartstrings, and I could feel, you know, stirrings in that place in your heart that triggers tears. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed reading about Addie's journey through the ages, even though it was very sad. It's also told in a dual timeline. One track is the past, following her when she makes the deal, and then forward through the centuries. And then the second line is also in the present day. And the villain in the story, this demon that she makes this bargain with, was interesting and scary. The romantic relationship in the book was compelling and full of wonder and desperation. It's a story with themes about persevering in the face of a hopeless future, finding joy where you can in life, the power of art. I really enjoyed it. And I typically prefer, as I said, more plot-driven books that are much faster paced, so it's saying something that I've enjoyed this as well as the last book as well. This was just tragic and beautiful. Do recommend. It has Schwab's simple writing style, but this is a little more flowery than her other stuff. Not too bad though. It's still very consumable and not difficult to read, and it was just great. Another Owl Crate book I finished was Skin of the Sea by Natasha Bowen. This is a West African fantasy following a girl named Simidele, who is a mamiwata, which is a mermaid. So it's about black mermaids. Amazing. This edition is also super gorgeous. It has gold sprayed edges, and just look. Well, first, yeah, look at this. It has just the most beautiful coloring, and the illustration on the dust jacket is also super, super pretty, and that's Simidele there. So Simidele's role as Mamiwata is to help shepherd the souls of people who die at sea to pass on to the afterlife. But one day she ends up saving the life of a boy who would have drowned without her help, and she doesn't realize that by saving him she's broken this ancient decree, and in order to protect the rest of her kind, she has to go on a journey to seek forgiveness from the supreme creator. And she encounters all of these gods and creatures and humans on her journey, and the stakes get very high. I really enjoyed certain aspects of this. Overall, I gave it 3 out of 5. I loved all of the African folklore elements. You just meet all of these different gods that are part of the Ifa pantheon of the Yoruba people. There are just a bunch of mythical creatures, like there are these creatures that are like fairies called yumbos. There's this water dwelling creature called the Ninki Nanka that they interact with, and like this book is just rich with mythology and fantasy creatures, but it takes place in the 1400s in our world. Slavery plays a prominent role in this book, and it's based on historical slave trade in the past, so it's important to acknowledge that. So yeah, I enjoyed all the West African cultural aspects. That part was great, but the writing style was a weird mix between a modern YA fantasy and the more poetic and grand way that mythology, like old ancient mythology, is written in. And I didn't really like it. It made the characters feel a little flat, even though they are more developed than characters in, you know, for instance, classic Greek parables and myths. I ended up reading this in lots of short bursts. Like, literally, I would read a few pages at a time before I would put it down again, because I just couldn't get into the groove of it, couldn't really get invested in the characters. And even though the stakes did get high, it was still the same. I just found it hard to really get invested in it. I did enjoy it more when I sort of shifted my mindset to treat it more like a classically told myth than treating it like I was reading a YA modern fantasy. But again, just the odd mixture of different storytelling vibes made this kind of hard to get through for me. So it averages out to a 3 in my mind. It was still good, I enjoyed it, but you know, not a favorite, and there were just things about it that I couldn't really get into. And lastly, I finished the audiobook for Sorcery of Thorns by Margaret Rogerson and narrated by Emily Ellett. And this is a YA fantasy about a girl named Elizabeth Scrivener who grew up as a foundling, so basically an orphan, in one of the great libraries of the land of Ostermere. And the great libraries contain magical sentient grimoires used by sorcerers whom Elizabeth was raised to believe are evil for practicing sorcery. And one day Elizabeth is implicated in a crime involving murder and an escaped grimoire that transformed into a monster and started kind of rampaging in the land. She's sent to the capital to face judgment for this and ends up getting wrapped up in this magical conspiracy, and she has to turn to a handsome young sorcerer that she met in the past named Nathaniel Thorn for help uncovering this mystery to prevent disaster from befalling the world. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. I liked it. It kind of surprised me that I enjoyed it. It felt a little young for me at first. I wasn't sure if I was going to feel invested enough in the characters and story, but luckily it got better as it went on pretty quickly, and by the end I had been hooked, you know, for a while. Elizabeth was a good heroine. She experiences more of the world and learns to let go of some of the prejudices that she has. I think that the chosen one trope in this book was done in an interesting and elegant way with her, and the relationship between her and Nathaniel grows at a slow and reasonable pace, which I liked. The best character is Nathaniel's companion, Silas. He's so cool and badass. I loved him. This also had a soft magic system with some rules defining how things worked. There are demonic summonings, and sorcerers can like mutter a spell and be able to like shoot lightning from their fingers or make statues come to life, those sorts of things. Again, I prefer harder, more structured magic systems, but this book did it pretty well. This was still okay, and again, done pretty well for being a little more loosey-goosey. I just mentioned how I didn't like how the magic system was kind of described and how it was used in Dreams Lie Beneath. Both of these books have softer magic systems, but this one felt more under control and was shown off in a much more interesting way. The ending was really cool and intense. I liked it, and no spoilers, but the end of the epilogue, no spoilers, was a little cheeky. It was cheeky. I narrowed my eyes a bit like, really? But overall, I was happy with it. I enjoyed this book a lot once it got rolling. I liked the characters and the world. It was just a good old YA fantasy, solid 4 out of 5. And those are all of the books that I read this month. 3 physical and 2 audiobooks. I've really been getting into listening to audiobooks basically whenever I can. Often when I would normally be listening to music, I'm listening to audiobooks now, which is allowing me to read even more each month. I think I read fewer books this month than before, kind of slowing down. I'm currently in the middle of reading the 5th book of the Throne of Glass series. It is a little chunkier than some of these other books, so next month I probably also will have read probably fewer books, but it was still a fun and interesting month. I'm really in particular glad that I finally got around to reading The Invisible Life of Addie Larue. I have a bunch of the Schwab books to go through. That's awesome. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!